Hello, everyone. It's Thursday, December 4th. It's just over 4 p.m. here in Montreal, and welcome to this interview for the PR Podcast. Today's topic is Need to Win in PR? Think like an owner. As always, I'm your host, Tan Sukhera, CEO and co-founder of PR, a company that helps leaders apply decision frameworks to complex challenges in the public relations and communications profession. Today's programming is meant to be helpful for anyone who aspires to make a greater impact in public relations. Whether you're a seasoned practitioner, a PR pro looking to build a reputation for yourself, or just starting out, this conversation should add a unique perspective to what it means to win and how to set on that mission. My guest today is someone I discovered through my timeline, serving hot takes, contrarian views, and celebrated for his no-nonsense approach to PR. A communicator who's taken a startup from zero to acquisition and uses those insights in his public relations consulting work. He's the post-PR agency consultant himself. I'm speaking about none other than Jon Amar. Jon Amar is a strategic communications and public relations expert with experience across government, PR agencies, VC-backed startups, and entrepreneurship. He's led public relations and communications initiatives in more than 20 industries, including AI, blockchain, climate tech, finance, food and agriculture, healthcare, nonprofit, real estate, and venture capital. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Axios, Bloomberg, CNBC, Fortune, The Washington Post, and many others. Jon's also the founder of Vetted, a PR technology platform acquired in 2022 and previously led communications teams at award-winning agencies supporting public and private companies nationwide. I'm personally a fan of his thought leadership, but best of all, he's just a great human being. Jon, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Wow, what an intro. Thanks, Tan. So happy to be here.
And with that, let's jump into some questions. And let's start at the top. Thinking like an owner, what does that mean to you? Can anyone in PR do it? And how do you define winning?
Yeah, anyone can do it. Yes, it requires a bit of a mindset shift. When I'm working with my clients, I try to think, obviously, like an owner, but in order to do that, I think there needs to be a mindset switch from vendor to partner, right? You're not just trying to be a line item in a marketing or communications budget. You want to be invited into the boardroom. You want the CEO calling you for advice. You want the chief comms officer calling you for advice. And you want to start out with a scope that is narrow and then eventually becomes broad because you've become so indispensable to the organization. And you are basically the head communicator. You are the go-to communications expert for all external and internal communications. And in order to do that, you need to understand the business goals, right? You need to understand how they make money. You need to understand how they attract and retain talent. You need to understand where they need to show up to meet new partners, to close sales, to attract new funding. And that's how owners think. They think, what am I going to do on a day-to-day basis? Where am I going to spend my time that is not going to allow me to grow the business? And, thankfully, and I'm grateful for this, that I've had an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to be a founder and a CEO. So that's kind of my edge. I know what it takes to build, grow, scale, exit a business. And I bring that into my PR work every single day.
The Canadian and International PR Association commentary on elevation of public relations similarly frames modern PR leadership as shifting organizational thinking about communication, with an emphasis on listening and stakeholder insights, shaping strategy, which again presumes both critical thinking and these quasi-owner stances towards enterprise risk and reputation. And that leads me to my next question. Jon, in your experience, how does this approach contrast with the way gigantic, sort of mega large agencies approach winning in the PR and comms industry?
Yeah, I mean, I could only speak from my own experience working inside big agencies. I've also worked in boutique agencies. I've also been an agency owner myself before I started my now boutique consultancy, which I kind of run like a law firm. But from my experience, they're chasing quarterly profits. right? And so they are playing the volume game. Most big agencies, especially publicly traded agencies, growth is top of mind. Quarterly returns, always top of mind, constantly monitoring the P&L. And that unfortunately results in a lot of turnover with staff and a lot of, upset clients. Again, just from my experience, not trying to overgeneralize here, but there have been a lot of experiences that I've personally witnessed where the client feels like they are not getting what they paid for, right? Because these big agencies are so concerned with quarterly growth and getting as many clients as possible. Their senior level people who are there at the beginning of the engagement, they go away quite quickly because they're off trying to close new deals. They are out there doing business development. And so with these big agencies, again, from what I've seen, they start off with senior level people who are staffing the accounts, but then they quickly get kicked down to junior level folks. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to be careful if you're growing too quickly and you're having your senior people who kind of have their hands off the ball for a little bit too long. You end up in the situation where the clients feel like they're not getting what they paid for. Because let's be honest, junior level PR people, while they can be really great, there's just a lot that they don't know. And there's a certain presence that they lack simply because they don't have as many years of experience. So the clients get disgruntled. They're like, why am I only dealing with a bunch of 20 somethings? Like I wanted the 30, 40-year-old senior person. Again, I'm not trying to be ageist here. It's just the facts. Like, right. If you have a decade plus worth of PR experience, you're gonna know more. Like odds are you're gonna know more. And so, yeah, that's what I've seen on the big agency side of things is more of a focus on scale and volume and quantity. And on consultants like me, we typically focus on quality, right? Like I personally focus on less is more with my practice. I want to have, 5 or 6 clients for years instead of 5 or 6 clients that are constantly turning over every single quarter and I'm constantly chasing new business. I want to position myself as a partner. I want to retain my clients. Again, thinking like an owner here, you want monthly, annual recurring revenue for years and years and years. You want to reduce churn as much as possible. That's what makes you ultimately a great business that's able to establish a legacy. And that's the kind of business that I'm in.
Wow. And so that comes back to the idea of business acumen, understanding how businesses work, how money is exchanged, the value that you create, who the real target audience is, how do they think? What do you think people are missing when it comes to that? Like, how do they even learn that? Is it only through doing? Is that the only way, or have you seen other ways?
I'm a big learn by doing kind of guy, but not everyone can be an entrepreneur, and that's okay. So before I became an entrepreneur, I was working a lot in like the business journals, like doing a lot of PR with business focused publications. I don't know if you have an equivalent of this in Canada, but there's a media network here in the US called the American Business Journals. So there's like a Denver Business Journal, there's a San Francisco Business Times. They're all owned by the same company. For many years, the beginning of my career, I was reading, this is when I was in Washington, D.C., I was reading the Washington Business Journal daily, not just because I had to, because I was pitching a lot of my clients to various reporters at that outlet, but because I found it genuinely interesting. Like, learning about acquisitions, learning about when I was working at real estate PR at the time, like learning about land deals, learning about different ways that finance can be structured, learning about, the different roles that companies are hiring for. And just a quick anecdote, I learned kind of early on in my career through reading the Business Journal and like Bloomberg's. I eventually graduated to reading Bloomberg. Is when companies start hire for a CFO, that typically means they're getting ready to go public, or they're getting ready to make a big acquisition or do a merger. And having that knowledge as a PR person, being able to find those signals is incredibly powerful. So I attribute a lot of my entrepreneurial instincts to reading business news and just genuinely being interested in it.
You hear that, folks? If you're just starting out, or it doesn't matter what level of comms you're at, that's something that you need to take into account is learning about the business, read voraciously, learn about geopolitics, understand the trade tariff wars that are going on and the economic uncertainties. Like, pick up a publication and read it, and the genuine interest is going to come through. And I think in the end of the day, people trust your knowledge because of that. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And I will, like, since I've been a non-technical founder and co-founder twice in my career, I have a bit of street cred, but before that, I already had a natural interest in business, and some members in my family were pursuing business as well. And there's a part of it that is just kind of innate, it's kind of like in my blood. It was a part of my upbringing. But yeah, to go back to the learn by doing thing, when I first co-founded my first company, I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning on the job, and I was staying curious. And when I didn't know something, I would try to go figure it out on my own or go talk to someone who had done it before. So I think bringing a level of interest and a level of curiosity to it really, really helped me out in the beginning. But yeah, like, especially the startup founders that I work with these days, they love the fact that I've like been through it before. And so there's definitely some street cred there. But in the absence of that, if just using startups as an example, if you're trying to get startups as clients, if you know about their like fundraising cycles, if you know about like early stage go to market strategy, if you know about like hiring strategy and product development strategy, going in and pitching yourself as a PR and comms consultant, you are going to, and if you know how to speak the language as well, like the jargon, you're going to beat out so many other PR and comms agencies who pretend to know what they're doing. And maybe they've had like great success. But if you're able to sort of meet these startup founders, just as an example, like where they're at and speak their language, you're going to surprise yourself by like how competitive you can be.
And I love what you said about curiosity because it's often overlooked. The propensity to ask why, just even if it's for the sake of learning of your own information, but you're in the process untangling a lot of the mental spaghetti, if you will, of how things actually work in the business. The propensity to keep asking why, it really helps to build the decision-making muscle. It's something that I find in my work. Is that something that you would advise as well? Or is it something that maybe people often they walk on eggshells. They don't want to create discomfort or uncomfortable scenarios. They're working with leaders. They're working with clients that are paying them money. Some people have a misconception that they should already know why everything works before they even walk in the door. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when you're onboarding a new client, this is just what I do. I want to get in as deep as possible. I want to understand, like I was saying earlier, like how are they making money? What's on their product roadmap? What sort of upcoming milestones do they have? Are they planning any hiring are they hiring for any leadership positions? Are there any leadership transitions that are happening? What is their, this is kind of a touchy subject for a lot of companies, but like, what's their biggest revenue driver? How much month over month growth have they experienced on the revenue front? And asking these questions and being just naturally curious about the business gives you some added credibility that ultimately compounds and makes you a stronger voice as a communicator. So you're not just helping them put out press releases or pitches in TechCrunch or whatever, but you're helping them, like you said earlier, make better decisions. And they know going in that you don't know everything about their business, but you need to ask questions early. And don't be afraid to ask the really, really hard questions or the uncomfortable questions. This is the biggest part. One of the biggest parts of PR is asking questions, right? Like, you need to pretend like you're a business journalist. You want to get inside there. And this is how you find stories. It's how you story mine, as we say in the industry. But it's also how you build more credibility and become a part of the leadership team and the leadership strategy, where again, you're not just a PR vendor and a line item on the marketing budget. You are the person that they need to bring in when they're making big business decisions, and they need someone to advise them on how to communicate it internally, how to communicate externally, know what their blind spots are, do some crisis planning, and really be the person who is available to them.
And that's a perfect caveat into my next question. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to push you to continue. Public relations excellence is really all about building trust and credibility across stakeholders. And if you're a consultant, it means quickly building trust and credibility with your client, who then in turn needs to do the same with their stakeholders. And leading up to this interview, you actually shared a key insight, which was to make this ownership mentality and take it and turn it around and into a consultant's actual superpower, and it had to do with storytelling. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yes. So when thinking like an owner in terms of storytelling, it's important to think about a couple of things, right? First one is, if you're the founder, what's your story? What makes you different from other founders out there? Imagine that you are on a stage pitching, a panel of venture capitalists and maybe some reporters. What are you going to say that's different from all the other people that came before you? What are you willing to say out loud that maybe other people in your peer network are saying quietly, in dark cocktail rooms? Do you have the courage and the conviction to be on that stage and say, I'm Jon. Here's what I stand for. Here's why we're truly different. And here's where we're going into places that no one else has gone before. And having that sort of that boldness with the founder led storytelling, I think is a critical place to start. And then the other thing to think about is, again, if you're the founder or the CEO of this business, what's sort of in the pipeline? What sort of deal flow do you have floating out there? Is there a big deal that is about to close next quarter that is going to be the biggest deal you've ever done? Or is it going to be with like a name brand or high brand equity organization that, your peers and your stakeholders are going to instantly recognize and are going to be like, whoa, holy moly, this company has incredible credibility because they're partnering with that person. So being able to sort of put on your CEO, your founder hat, like almost as if you're like role playing as the owner, can help uncover stories that help move the needle, help get you into new media outlets or help expand on existing media relationships with trade publications, for example, if you're trying to increase share of voice amongst your competitive peers.
That's where you find the juicy stories. If you didn't have the POV of thinking like an owner, then you wouldn't be asking the right questions. You wouldn't be digging into the right topics that then become the DNA or the backbone, the spine of the story.
That's right. And I think, a lot of PR people and agencies, they report to the director of marketing. That's not a good thing. If you want to think like an owner and have this owner mindset in your PR and communication strategy, you need to be reporting to the C-suite. You need to have a direct line to the CEO. You don't need to be meeting with them every single day. But if you're going through a gatekeeper every single time, you're not going to be the first person to know, or even the second person to know when something big happens in the business. There's a filter in place, so you're not going to get the full story. So whenever I'm working with clients, even if I'm with like the head of comms, I love to make sure that I'm getting at least like a monthly session with the CEO, with the founder, with the executive director, whomever is like at the helm of the company, who's able to give me these unfiltered insights. That's how you create strategies that are differentiated. Those are the winning strategies right there. The ones that are unfiltered, the ones that are ungate kept. Obviously, you need to like clear them with the gatekeepers once you've sort of absorbed these unfiltered insights and business objectives. But having a semi-regular line of sight, or even just getting the ear of that leader of the company, is the difference between a moderate PR and comm strategy and an exceptional PR and comm strategy.
And where else are you going to find out this information, especially when it's coming through this source, right? So that's a great share. Honestly, really good, insightful points there. Also, recent academic studies on storytelling agree. They argue that The narrative is not only just a message style, but it's also a strategic asset that shapes how stakeholders interpret even organizational change or broader societal debates. And one 2024 paper on storytelling and PR campaigns found that narrative structures foster empathy and strengthen emotional connection and support reputation repair, especially when you're in a situation where the brand is facing adversity. Now, that leads me to the next question. There is growing work inside PR associations and communities cataloging the most common cognitive traps that shape comms decisions. They consistently highlight a few clusters that are owner mindset accelerants, and their financially motivated biases, their socially motivated biases and favoritism, and short termism. In other words, they're a failure to think about long term effects. So when you encourage PR leaders to think like an owner or a consultant to think like an owner, where do you see these sort of traps show up most in day to day decisions? And how does that intersect with environments where your clients operate in, like venture capital or social impact organizations?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. And yeah, I run into sort of short-termism versus long-termism thinking quite a bit. And I think the easiest trap, and I think a lot of PR professionals can empathize with this, is, when the client says, like, when are we getting on the cover of the Wall Street Journal? Or like, it's been a month, how come we're not getting media hits? And it's almost like they're like the client's kind of chasing media hits as if it's like a dopamine addiction. And you could get top tier media hits every single month, and there's a high chance that they won't move the needle at all. I've gotten clients into the New York Times before, and it landed with like the story was amazing, but it resulted in almost zero like business flow. Now, that said, you have to think long term here, right? So if that New York Times piece eventually turns into a podcast interview 3 months down the line, which then turns into a documentary feature a year later, all because of the New York Times piece, then I think you've done your job right as a PR professional. But being able to to communicate to the client, like, hey, seeking out monthly media mentions is not going to give you that immediate dopamine hit. It's not going to move the needle that month per se. If we take the long-term view and we say this New York Times piece is going to compound and it's going to lead to podcast interviews, additional media commentary where you're constantly referencing back to that New York Times piece. Maybe you're raising venture capital and you say, we've been featured in the New York Times, but VCs sometimes take a long time to sign that term sheet. So taking this long-term view and communicating that to the client and having them really trust you on this, which is a challenge, right? Like, I'm in the business of helping other people build trust with their stakeholders. At the same time, I need to build trust with my clients, and they need to learn to sort of trust me pretty quickly, or they're going to cut my contract in the first quarter. But being able to show them this is what happens when you take the long-term view, I think is really, really critical. And maybe even showing them what they're like. Here's an example of like your competitor taking a long-term view. Like they were able to get on a 60 Minutes piece because they were featured in TechCrunch 2 years ago. And then because they were on TechCrunch, they were featured on some tech podcast. Good PR takes time. And when you take the long-term view on PR, you're able to watch it compound. And if you stay consistent with it, if you stick with it and keep pushing, keep seeding stories, the results will multiply over time and they'll stay there for longer than just a quarterly media blitz.
It's like a law of compounding returns. It's like when you look at this thing and you keep building it little by little, month after month, with high quality, intentional, crafted storytelling and pieces that move the needle for your stakeholders, that beyond just the blush of, you said that the dopamine hit, right? The beyond the endorphin rush of, wow, look at me, I'm in the New York Times. If you build it little piece at a time, every single day, consistently, every month, every week, then it's better for you in the long run than even if the short term somehow you got really lucky and it's everything you dreamed of. It's not realistic, basically. You have to take
It,
a long term view of it in order for you to
you,
have an accurate picture of how it works. Is that right?
you do. And like PR is high risk, high reward. If you want guaranteed results for your business, like guaranteed communications results, PR is not your best bet. Advertising is your best bet, right? That's how you guarantee eyeballs. You can't necessarily guarantee like engagement, but it's significantly more predictable. Same with like performance marketing. But when good PR works well, it's patient, it's consistent, and it compounds. And the best leaders out there, the best companies out there, the ones that have been around for decades, they know that. They know that. They're willing to be patient. They're willing to trust their their PR professional. I almost want to like get a t-shirt that says like trust your local PR pro. Um, but I also don't want to discount like the potential for like that one big media hit to be like completely game changing for your business, right? Like, but it depends on what the story is. There was I just read about this week. There was a startup that raised money from Mark Cuban. They only raised a $3 million seed. Mark Cuban was one of the investors. They reached out to Mark Cuban via cold email. And Mark Cuban like famously reads his own emails. Not all of them, but he is very interested in like finding new deals to fund. And they closed that deal with him. They made the announcement in TechCrunch, and it went completely viral because people loved the story of a scrappy startup founder emailing this hotshot celebrity VC. So the story got picked up in Reuters, it got picked up Associated Press, it got picked up in Inc., in Business Insider. It went completely bananas. And obviously that stuff happens, but it's rare and it's highly dependent on your story. Like that is a very consumer friendly story. People know Mark Cuban. He has mass appeal. He's on Shark Tank. So, but in the absence of, celebrity endorsements, you really need to be highly strategic, highly methodical, and think long term. Like when you're considering PR and communications, it's like, how can we not just build a brand that people trust this quarter, but what's the brand that we could build that people are going to trust for years to come?
Jon, as you know, our audience is primarily made up of a global PR and comms leadership sort of group. And especially since we're in prediction season at the end of the year, they appreciate advice from people like you who aren't just sharing perspective, but also carrying it out in real life. And just like thinking like an owner can mean knowing all the external forces and factors that can uniquely impact their business. I'd love to have you just touch upon your views on the importance of being aware of the future industry trends, or to put it differently, the headwinds and the tailwinds that have real world consequences for PR leaders as we prepare for the next year ahead.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that I've been seeing this year that I'm anticipating, will be bigger issues in 2026. I think the first one that comes to mind is, and I think most PR professionals know this by now, is that PR pros outnumber journalists roughly 7-1. At the same time, newsrooms are shrinking or they're consolidating. Reporters are simply underpaid and overworked. And so it's become harder than ever, even just compared to 5 years ago, it's been harder than ever to get clients placed, to get earned media. And adding to that is the emerging industry that is digital PR. And that is basically, it's an offshoot of PR. It's a combination of SEO and digital marketing. And this year, they've really been capitalizing on AI, specifically GEO, generative engine optimization. So recommendations from ChatGPT and Claude. There's research out now that proves that earned media, including newswires, are greatly impacting GEO results. And so you have these digital, air quote, digital PR people who have really deep experience in SEO now getting into the earned media and pitching game. And they don't all have backgrounds in pitching, and they don't all understand media etiquette and the whole media landscape. They're just chasing backlinks. Not all of them, but many, many of them. And that scares me, because what that has resulted in my business is people come to me after they've got done dealing with or being pitched by a digital PR person, and they think that that is what PR is, just link building and keyword research. So it's creating this like misinformation like vacuum that requires traditional PR pros like me and like millions of others to educate. Like, we need not only educate clients, like, actually this is what PR actually, really means. It's not just link building, it's trust building. And we also need to educate digital PR people, because they're here. Like, the industry is here. We're not. I would love to be able to change their name, because I don't really think digital PR. I mean, PR is PR is PR is PR. And then SEO is SEO is SEO. But if we could work together, we could do really, really great things. So I think in 2026, I see a unification of SEO and PR in a way that's never really been done before. There's new research that just came out. Over 60% of digital PR pros report to the SEO department. PR pros, we report to the head of comms or director of comms or the C-suite. That's a lot of layers in between, the head communicator, the PR person, and the digital PR person. And I think that's very, very dangerous for our industry. I think it's very dangerous for the clients as well. And so, there's plenty of business out there. We don't need to like go to war or go to battle with one another. But I think there needs to be an honest conversation about, what actually is digital PR, honestly. Let's not BS ourselves here. And how can, traditional PR pros and strategic communicators work hand in hand with digital PR and SEO people. I think the other consideration for 2026 that's not related to, what I just said, is knowing that Chat GBT and other sort of AI services out there are starting to pull more information from company blogs and owned media in general. I think there's going to be a renewed investment in owned media, specifically brand journalism. So bringing journalistic integrity and journalistic practices to a company newsroom where you're telling stories, not just putting out press releases and blog pieces, right? Just doing more in-depth storytelling. An example there is, or maybe not an example, but what I saw just a couple weeks ago, big tech, they're hiring head of content roles that are paying $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. I think I saw the other day, like OpenAI was hiring for a head of editorial strategy for hundreds of thousands of dollars plus equity plus bonus. So they see the writing on the wall. Big tech is seeing the writing, and I think there are a lot of companies out there that also maybe see it but aren't investing heavily into it. I think the companies that are really going to succeed in 2026 are the ones who are treating their communications platform as if it were a newsroom.
Wow. And that reminds me of like the trust barometer and the decline of trust in the media and
Right.
the increase in trust in companies and business.
And their
And
CEOs specifically.
so then at the same time, now the newsrooms come into play, the corporate newsrooms come into play. But like, can they even get rid of the bias? How are they independent? I have a hard time seeing what that looks like. I wonder, just out of curiosity, what do you see that looking like? It's a journalistic integrity. They're going to go like mini docu style pieces about maybe partners, vendors, other types of external stakeholders? Is that what it would look like?
Where I've seen it be successful, I think Patagonia does a really, really good job of
Right.
this. I think that's just name dropping. One of my clients, Acumen, they're a nonprofit impact investor. They do a fantastic job of multimedia storytelling, and they leverage their founder on social media. They leverage their deep bench of subject matter experts on social media. They're not afraid to step in front of the camera. They're not afraid to share their unfiltered or like semi-filtered thoughts. And so, they're working with former journalists. Like their content team includes former freelance journalists. And I hope that we see more of that in 2026, because there are a lot of amazing journalists out there who, like I was saying earlier, are severely overworked, severely underpaid, and they're really, really good at what they do. And, I think if we're trying to support this like information ecosystem and this news ecosystem, we need to deal with the realities of these shrinking newsrooms and the realities of, shrinking ad revenues at these news companies, and hire a journalist. Like there's the call to action. You want a better content program? Hire a journalist or a former journalist, or hire a team of former journalists or freelance journalists. I think you'll be amazed by the results, and together you can create an editorial strategy that is journalistic in sort of integrity and aligned with like corporate brand values and mission and your organizational objectives.
Well, I gotta agree with that. As a former news anchor myself, hire a journalist. That's the T-shirt I'll get. You get the other one. I'll put that one on mine. But on that note, it looks like that's all the time that we have here today, folks. And it concludes another insightful, informative edition of the PR podcast. And I hope you're appreciative of the new lens that Jon has contributed with, so that you can try it out for yourself, experience your world in a different light. I know I appreciate it, and I want to express my gratitude to you, Jon. It's awesome to have you on the show, and thank you so much for making the time with us today.
Thanks, Tan. This was great.